Her grandson smeared barbecue sauce on her blouse, and no one said a word. Irene Walker, retired educator and fun custodian, just kept chewing. Troy laughed like it was a joke. Hannah called it playful. By summer, his Yale dreams would collapse, silently, legally, and without appeal. She didn't raise her voice. She rewrote the paperwork. And when the family finally noticed, it was already too late to apologize. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The scent of mesquite-smoked brisket hung heavy in the dining room, curling through the air with the slow weight of a Texas summer evening. The long family table gleamed beneath a runner of faded blue linen. Paper napkins, glistening sauce bottles, and plastic serving trays were scattered in careless abundance, a catered Sunday dinner that had once been a tradition, now more of a tolerated ritual. Irene Walker sat at the far end, her posture as straight as the carved back of the high-backed chair she occupied. She wore a crisp white blouse, pearl buttons fastened to the throat. A small gold brooch in the shape of a magnolia was pinned neatly to the collar. She'd bought the blouse years ago, back when people still noticed when she entered a room. Across from her, Troy leaned on his elbow, licking sauce from his fingers with loud, wet smacks. His hair flopped into his eyes, but he didn't care. He was 17 and ruled the room like a boy king. The world had always bent for him. Irene reached for the sweet tea pitcher. That's when it happened, quick, careless, and surgical. Troy leaned in, eyes still locked on his phone, and dragged his sticky, sauce-covered hands across her sleeve. Thick, greasy streaks bloomed red-brown across the snowy fabric. It wasn't an accident. It was aim. "Damn," he said with a half-grin, not looking at her. "Didn't see that there." A beat passed, then came the laughter, light, indulgent, and sharp-edged. Hannah giggled from the middle of the table, wine glass in hand. "He's just playing, Mom," she said, flicking her hair over her shoulder. He didn't mean anything by it. James didn't look up from his plate. He stabbed a potato wedge and muttered something under his breath, something non-committal enough to be ignored. Libby, sitting small at the corner, looked up sharply. Her gaze darted to Irene's blouse, then to her brother, then back again. Her lips parted slightly. She mouthed one word, "Sorry." Irene looked down at her sleeve, at the streaks of Troy's disregard carved into the cotton like a signature. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for the napkin at her place setting, blotted the sauce gently, then folded it over once more. No one else said a word. Outside, cicadas shrilled under the darkening sky. A sprinkler hissed to life in the front yard, ticking rhythmically against the shutters. "I think I'll have some cobbler," Irene said softly, her voice steady as a metronome. She rose from her chair and moved toward the kitchen, with the grace of someone long practiced in being invisible. No one offered to help. In the kitchen, she opened the refrigerator, let the cold hit her face. Her hand reached for the foil-covered dish. As she slid it onto the counter, she caught her reflection in the microwave door, shoulders tight, eyes still and unreadable. She picked up a spoon and took a small bite. Behind her, the sounds of casual conversation rolled on. Hannah was recounting something about Troy's SAT tutor. James mumbled agreement. Troy laughed at something on his phone. Irene's sleeve clung to her arm now, tacky and damp. She looked at it, then slowly turned on the faucet. Cool water rushed out. She dabbed a sponge against the stain and watched it smear wider. Footsteps behind her. Light ones. "Grandma?" Libby's voice hushed. Irene turned. The girl stood in the doorway, holding a paper plate stacked with meat and corn salad. "I saved you the corner piece," she said, "of the brisket." Irene nodded once. That was thoughtful. Libby lingered, eyes scanning the sleeve. "He shouldn't have done that." "No," Irene said, rinsing the sponge again. "He shouldn't have." "You're not mad?" Irene wrung out the sponge and laid it beside the sink. "No," she said, not because it was true, but because it was finished. Libby hesitated, then placed the plate on the counter. "It's still your blouse, though." Irene smiled gently. "Yes, it is." In the other room, Troy was asking for seconds. The girl left without another word, soft footsteps fading back into the noise. Irene stood alone in the kitchen, steam rising from the cobbler pan beside her. The stain on her blouse still damp, still visible. She folded her arms slowly, covering the mark. Then she looked at the hallway. Past it, behind the door of her study, sat a file cabinet no one had touched in years. Inside, the future waited, quiet, orderly, unassuming. But not for long. Morning light broke through the blinds in slender, silent slats, striping the carpet of Irene's study in alternating gold and shadow. The air smelled faintly of lavender and printer toner. This room was hers, had always been hers, even if no one ever asked what she did in here. She sat at the roll-top desk, the same one James had built her for her 50th birthday, back when time still felt like a gift. The blouse from the night before, freshly laundered but still damp at the seams, hung from the back of her chair, the magnolia brooch gleaming quietly under the desk lamp. Her fingers moved with slow precision across the keyboard. The investment portal took a few seconds to load. Then, there it was. Walker Education Fund. Custodial 529 plan beneficiary. Troy James Walker. Total account value. $182,314.76. 17 years of careful planning. Birthday checks uncashed. Dividends rolled back in. Interest monitored through recessions and rallies. Irene had watched this fund grow the way one watches a sapling bend in storms, attentive but distant, all for the boy who wiped his hands on her sleeve and laughed when it stained. She clicked the tab marked Edit Beneficiary. The screen flashed a warning. This action is irreversible once executed. Her phone buzzed. She didn't flinch. Marcia Trent, accountant. Irene answered on speaker and kept her eyes on the screen. Morning, Marcia. Well, I didn't expect to hear from you on a Saturday. I've been reviewing Troy's fund. Irene said, wanted to confirm the custodial structure. Marcia's voice shifted subtly, alert, professional. You're the sole custodian. Irene, that's never changed. You have full discretion over transfers, revocation, reassignments. No one else can access it without your express permission. Irene nodded slowly, more to herself than anyone. And if the beneficiary becomes inappropriate? Marcia paused. You mean legally or ethically? Both, Irene said. You're protected either way. It's in the documents we filed in 2011. Any sustained behavior reflecting disrespect or misuse of familial trust qualifies as grounds for revocation. It was your clause. Irene let the silence sit. Then softly, I remember. Marcia hesitated. Are you planning to move the funds? Not today, but I'd like to begin preparing alternatives. Quietly, I'll draft the reassignment document. You just fill in the new name when you're ready. Irene ended the call. She opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. The first sheet had the heading, Contingency A, written in tidy cursive. Below it she began to list, academic performance, respectful conduct, demonstrated initiative, absence of entitlement, undermining or manipulative behavior, =, disqualification. She underlined the last line twice. The doorbell rang. From the window, she spotted Rita's old tan Buick parked in the driveway, tilted just slightly across the curb as usual. Irene rose and opened the front door to find her sister already halfway up the steps, sunglasses on, holding 2 paper cups from the bakery downtown. Well, Rita said, eyeing the blouse drying on the chair behind Irene, either you went paintballing at a barbecue or someone forgot who raised their father. Irene stepped aside and let her in. I washed it twice, but you kept it. Rita handed over one of the cups. Hope you're planning a quiet execution. Irene took a long sip. Vanilla chai. Perfectly warm. Not execution, she said finally, walking back toward the desk. Just a redirection. Rita sat on the edge of the chair like she always did, perched, hawk-eyed. Don't waste energy on the boy. That kind of arrogance only survives when it's subsidized. Irene tapped the keyboard again. He's been subsidized long enough. She clicked out of the portal and began flipping through a locked cabinet. Birth certificates, tax forms, trust agreements, envelopes marked Walker Family Legacy in blue ink. Rita craned her neck. You really going to do it? Irene slid a fresh folder into place, one labeled in clean print, Lebby Grace Walker. Drafted, not going to do anything dramatic, she said, returning to her pad. I'm just going to give a gift to someone who still knows how to say thank you. Outside, a car horn honked faintly in the distance. The ice maker clicked in the kitchen. The world moved forward, slow and oblivious. Rita leaned back, a smile twitching at the corners of her mouth. Well, I do love a redirection with teeth. Irene glanced down at the legal pad. She tapped her pen once, twice, then wrote 3 new words beneath the last disqualification clause. Effective immediately, considered, documented, enforceable. Her pen stilled. The email arrived just before sunset. No subject line, just a single attachment and a single word in the body. Proof. Irene clicked it. Her screen flickered once before the video opened, captured from a shaky phone camera tilted just above plate level. There was the Sunday table, lit in warm yellows, dotted with trays of ribs and foil-wrapped potatoes. The angle wobbled, then settled. The audio was fuzzy but clear enough. She saw herself first, seated calmly, reaching for the sweet tea. Then, unmistakably, the moment. Troy turned toward her, his mouth half-cocked in a grin. His eyes darted, not at her, but at Libby, across the table. As if playing to an audience, he reached out both hands, slow, theatrical, and dragged them, palm to sleeve, across Irene's blouse. The room didn't pause. Laughter followed, loose and indulgent. But the video didn't stop there. The camera caught Hannah watching it happen, not reacting in horror, not correcting him, just a flick of her eyes, a knowing smirk, and then she calmly speared a piece of cucumber from her salad. Irene paused the video. The screen froze on Hannah's face, her mouth twisted into something just short of entertainment. Irene's hand moved to the mouse, steady and deliberate. She clicked Save As and titled the file Justification, MP4. Then she opened her secure folder, the one nested 3 directories deep, behind 2 passwords and a fingerprint scan. She placed the file inside. For one long moment, she simply stared at it. Then she exhaled through her nose and clicked Print Screen. The still image of Troy's outstretched hands, frozen mid-smear, was copied to her clipboard. She opened her photo editor, cropped it precisely, and hit print. The laser printer whirred to life. From behind the curtain of the study window, the sky outside faded toward rose-colored dusk. She slipped the warm photo printout into a plastic sheet protector, then into her black 3-ring binder, the one marked in fine point Sharpie, Fund Action, Confidential. The knock on the door didn't startle her. I brought the lemon scones, Rita said, already pushing the door open with her elbow. Irene closed the binder gently. I didn't ask for scones. You didn't ask me to review your retirement clause either, but here I am. Rita placed the bakery bag on the desk and leaned in. You look like someone who just buried a body. Not yet, Irene replied, opening the drawer to file the binder away. But I just dug the hole. Rita raised an eyebrow. You found something? Libby recorded it. Irene said simply. Rita's mouth parted. She what? The whole moment, Irene continued, start to finish, including Hannah's reaction. Well, Rita said, letting the syllable stretch. That girl's got a spine hidden somewhere in that cardigan. Irene allowed herself the faintest smile. She sent it without a word. Rita nodded slowly. She's watching, carefully. I think she always has been. Irene tapped her keyboard, opening Marcia's contact again. I'm not the only one Troy performed for. She began typing an email. Subject reassignment drafts. Hi Marcia. Please proceed with the initial draft of the reassignment paperwork. I'll provide final details within the week. Thank you, Irene. She hit send. Behind her, the printer beeped softly. A second copy of the image was printing, a backup. She placed it in a folder marked personal copy, slid it into her fire-safe box under the desk. Care to stay for tea? Irene asked, standing. Rita shook her head. Can't, but I'll say this, if I ever die suddenly, I want you to be the one to explain it to people. You make things look like an accident, but they bleed with purpose. Irene chuckled under her breath. This isn't punishment, it's protection. As Rita turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. You know, there's something satisfying about truth you can pause and replay. Like holding lightning in a bottle. Irene nodded once. That's exactly what it feels like. When the door closed, Irene sat back down and opened the video once more. She didn't watch the whole thing. Just the moment. Just the exact second when her grandson looked straight at her, with that rehearsed grin and chose to disrespect her not out of impulse, but intent. She paused on his face. Then she clicked Lock File, encrypting it for permanent storage. The school secretary had the kind of voice that made Irene want to sit up straighter, even over the phone. Are you requesting her transcript as a parent or guardian? Irene held the receiver close and steady. Neither. I'm her grandmother. And I'm not requesting it. I'm simply asking to review it in person. A beat of silence on the other end. The faint click of nails on a keyboard. She's over 16, so she can give permission. A pause. Libby already did. This morning, actually. Irene's eyebrows lifted slightly. Did she? Yes, ma'am. Said you'd probably want to see it sooner than later. Irene smiled at nothing and she's right. 10 minutes later, Irene was seated in a small office off the main hallway of the school. The kind that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and dusted carpet. A printout sat neatly on the desk in front of her. Libby Grace Walker, 11th grade, 4.2 GPA, top of her class, advanced placement courses stacked like scaffolding, president of the library club, peer tutor twice a week, volunteer hours logged with surgical precision, all of it silent, hidden beneath soft cardigans and second-hand. No one at that Sunday table knew this. Irene reached into her bag and slid on her reading glasses. She took her time with each line. Beside her sat a blank notepad, her pen already ticked through possibilities. She didn't look up until a quiet knock tapped at the frame of the office door. Libby stood there, backpack slung low on one shoulder, hair tucked behind both ears. They said you were here. I asked to see your records, Irene said plainly. Libby's eyes flicked toward the printout. Thought you might. I wasn't sure you'd say yes. Libby stepped inside and dropped her bag onto the second chair. I figured if you were asking, you already knew the answer. Irene studied the girl, nervous hands, pinched expression, trying not to seem hopeful. Do you still want to go to college? Irene asked. Libby looked down. Of course. Then why haven't I heard a word about applications? Libby hesitated. Because Mom says we can't afford both. Me and Troy. And he has the fund. The silence that followed felt thick and mechanical, like the hum of fluorescent lights. She said maybe I could try for community college first, Libby added, quieter. Or take a gap year. Help out at home. Irene turned back to the transcript, tapped her pen against the final column. These aren't gap year grades. Libby shrugged. I figured if I kept my numbers up, maybe someone would notice. Irene leaned forward slightly. Someone did. For a moment, Libby looked as if she might speak, but then stopped herself. Her fingers twisted the zipper of her backpack in tight loops. Irene reached for her pad and wrote down one word at the top. Scholarships. Maybe someone, she said slowly, should reconsider the definition of we. Libby blinked at her, the edges of her mouth twitching like she wasn't sure if she was being joked with or saved. Outside the office, the school bell shrieked, and the hallway filled with sneakers and chatter. I'll walk you out, Irene offered. They stepped into the tide of students and made their way toward the front exit. It was the first time in years Irene had walked shoulder to shoulder with someone in that building. When they reached the car, she opened the passenger door for Libby, who climbed in without speaking. On the drive home, Irene said nothing. She didn't need to. The facts had spoken. The transcript was folded neatly in her purse, and a name was beginning to shape itself on the lines Marcia had left blank. Back at the house, Rita was perched on the porch swing, sipping something cold from a mason jar. She raised an eyebrow as Irene stepped out of the car. Well? She asked. Irene didn't answer right away. She opened her purse, pulled out the transcript, and handed it over. Rita scanned the first page, then let out a low whistle. The smart ones, she murmured, are often the quietest. Irene took the paper back and looked out over the yard, where a sprinkler had begun its slow rotation, mist catching in the last golden rays of daylight. She's not just smart, she said. She's overlooked. She turned and went inside. The voices started downstairs, not loud, but sharp, brittle around the edges. Irene was at the kitchen table, spooning honey into a mug of black tea, the kind she liked best, strong enough to stain porcelain, quiet enough to keep her steady. She heard Hannah first. You were supposed to remind me, James. I asked you to, literally wrote it on the calendar. I thought you submitted it last week, James muttered. I didn't, she snapped. And now it's closed. The early FAFSA window is gone, James. Do you even understand what that means for Ivy application? A cabinet slammed. Footsteps crossed the tile. I'll call them. Maybe there's a late submission process. Irene stirred her tea slowly. The honey melted in lazy spirals. They won't make exceptions for stupidity, Hannah said. Troy needed that form yesterday. James's voice lowered into that weary tone he always used when the house felt too full of women. Maybe it's not the end of the world. Oh no, not the end of the world, Hannah interrupted. Just the end of early admissions. Do you have any idea what that does to his odds at Yale? There was a beat of silence. Then came Troy's voice, drifting in like a sigh. Why are you freaking out? Grandma's paying anyway. Irene set her spoon down gently. The cup trembled slightly as she lifted it, but her hand was steady. From the back door, Rita appeared, barefoot and holding a grocery bag of lemons and rosemary. Sounds like someone forgot to put the future on the calendar, she said, brushing past the screen door. They missed the FAFSA deadline, Irene said. Rita raised an eyebrow. And somehow that's your fault. Irene sipped her tea. Apparently, Rita dropped the bag on the counter. Poor planning isn't your emergency. Irene said nothing. She reached for her notebook, the yellow legal pad she'd kept tucked beneath the day's crossword. Her notes were right where she'd left them, neatly bullet-pointed, underlined, evaluated. Her eyes scanned the page until she found it. Final clause. Sustained disrespect nullifies eligibility. Custodian retains sole discretion. She picked up her pen and underlined sole discretion. Then, with the same hand she once used to grade high school essays in red ink, she drew a clean diagonal line through the name at the top of the page. Troy James Walker. She opened her drawer, retrieved a second folder. This one crisp, freshly labeled. A single document sat inside. The initial draft from Marcia, unassigned, ready for signature. Rita peered over her shoulder. Is that what I think it is? Irene didn't answer. She flipped to the back and began writing in the margin. Clause enforced. Eligibility revoked. Alternate beneficiary pending. You're not hesitating, Rita observed. No, Irene said. I'm not. In the hallway the voices had lowered. Hannah was calling someone, probably the school counselor, probably rehearsing a string of excuses that began with "our family's been under stress" and ended with "we were misinformed." James's voice had disappeared entirely. Troy's footsteps creaked overhead. Rita walked to the fridge, pulled out a pitcher of lemonade, and poured herself a glass. He really said you'd pay anyway. He did. Well, she said, sipping, that should save us postage on the revocation letter. Irene placed her pen down, then signed the bottom of the transfer document with slow, even strokes. Her name, the date, one final line, executed under clause authority. Then she closed the folder. No announcements, no grand pronouncements, just the soft click of a drawer locking shut. The tea had gone tepid, but Irene drank it anyway, her eyes fixed on the afternoon light crawling across the floor like a silent verdict. Upstairs, Troy laughed at something on his phone. Hannah snapped, "Turn that down," and James muttered, "Just give it a second." None of them knew what had just happened. None of them knew they'd already lost. It was after dinner when Libby knocked, gentle, almost hesitant. Irene was in the den, her glasses low on her nose, a worn copy of Fahrenheit 451 open in her lap. The fire in the hearth wasn't lit, but the silence flickered like it was. I found something," Libby said from the doorway. Irene looked up. "Did you lose it first?" Libby half smiled and stepped into the room, holding out a folded sheet of paper. "It's a college essay. I never turned it in." Irene set the book aside and took the page, unfolding it with care. The paper was creased at odd angles, smudged faintly at the corners, handled too many times, submitted never. "I didn't think I'd get the fee waiver," Libby said quickly, like she was trying to get ahead of the silence. "And Mom said it didn't make sense to apply unless we were sure. So I just kept it." Irene read the first paragraph. It was about a library, not the school's, but one Libby had built herself, shelf by shelf, in the back corner of the garage. She'd cataloged books no one read anymore, repaired paperbacks with clear tape and patience. Because some things are worth restoring, even if no one checks them out. Irene didn't say a word until she finished the last line. "Who helped you write this?" she asked. "No one," Libby said, eyes downcast. That's clear, Irene said softly. It's honest, rough in the right places. Libby stood frozen, like she hadn't decided whether to be proud or embarrassed. I kept thinking, she added, if I waited long enough, someone would tell me it was okay to try. But no one did. Irene stood, her knees cracking faintly as she crossed to her desk. What's the application fee? 75, Libby said. But if you add test scores and reports, it's over 100. I didn't want to ask. Irene opened her checkbook. You're not asking, I'm offering. She scribbled the check, slid it into a new envelope, and tucked the essay inside. Then she reached into the top drawer for her stationery, the heavy cream paper she reserved for funerals, letters to editors, and the rare occasion someone needed to be remembered in writing. What are you doing? Libby asked. Submitting a recommendation, Irene said, already uncapping her pen. You can't say you built a library without someone to verify the architecture. Libby sat down, silent. Irene's words moved carefully across the page. Firm, declarative, unmistakably hers. When she finished, she slid it all into a manila folder marked Application, University Submission, Libby G. Walker. She didn't tell anyone else, didn't mention it over breakfast, didn't text James, and certainly didn't share it with Hannah. But that night, Irene called Marcia. The reassignment? Marcia asked. Complete it, Irene said. Are you sure you want to do it without telling them? I'm past wanting, Irene replied. The next morning, Marcia sent confirmation. Walker Education Fund. Beneficiary reassigned. Libby Grace Walker effective. Immediately. The fund was sealed. The transfer irrevocable. That afternoon, Irene passed through the living room, where Hannah was curled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. A fresh Facebook post sat open on the screen. Troy's college journey is ramping up. Yale, Stanford, Columbia. Let's go. #proud mom, #Ivy track. The caption was nestled beneath a photo of Troy in a quarter-zip pullover, smirking next to a vision board of Ivy logos and vague ambition. Irene glanced at it once, then continued toward the kitchen. Rita was already there, icing a lemon cake like it was a national duty. You look like someone who just erased a roadmap. Irene poured herself a glass of water. Not erased, rerouted. Rita smirked. Does he know? No, Irene said, lifting the glass to her lips. Some paths disappear before anyone realizes they've left them. Outside, the sprinklers ticked to life across the lawn. The arc of water caught the late sunlight, casting fleeting little rainbows across the rose bushes. Inside the folder, tucked away in Irene's locked drawer, Libby's application waited, stamped, signed, and ready for submission. The envelope was cream-colored, government-issued and ignored. Troy pulled it from the mail stack with one hand while scrolling TikTok with the other. IRS something, he muttered. Probably a form. He didn't even break stride toward the trash bin. Hold up, James said, from the dining table. Let me see it. Troy rolled his eyes and tossed the envelope across the table like it offended him. I'm not doing taxes. I'm a kid. You're 17, James replied, tearing it open. You've got a 529. They send annual reports. Still not doing taxes, Troy said, heading upstairs. That's what FAFSA's for. And Grandma. The door clicked shut above. James skimmed the first page, then frowned. In the corner, under Form 1099Q, distributions from qualified education programs, a line read, Beneficiary, Libby Grace Walker disbursement. None in 2024. He blinked, read it again. The date was current. The fund listed was right. But the name, Babe? James called toward the kitchen. Did you see this, Hannah? Already half buried in FAFSA forums and Ivy League subreddits. Barely looked up. What now? James walked in, holding the document like it might bite. Troy got a tax form from the 529, but it's addressed to Libby. Hannah snatched it from him. Her brow furrowed. This can't be right. I thought your mom had to authorize everything. She does, Hannah said, the words landing with the weight of assumption, not fact. But even as she said it, a flicker of unease crossed her face. She grabbed her laptop and opened the FAFSA portal again. A red banner greeted her. Submission error. Missing financial aid verification. Custodial control undetermined. I don't understand, she said, scrolling fast. We submitted everything. Twice. James leaned against the counter, rubbing the back of his neck. Maybe it's a glitch. Or maybe came a quiet voice from the doorway. You should double-check who controls the fund. They both turned. Irene stood there, back straight, tea in hand, calm as ever. Hannah blinked. Excuse me, I said, Irene repeated. You might want to double-check the custodian of the 529. James swallowed hard. Mom, what happened? I believe the document speaks for itself, Irene said, taking a long sip, though I wouldn't recommend throwing it out next time. Hannah stepped forward, voice rising. Wait, are you saying you? I'm not saying anything, Irene said, turning back toward the hallway. But I did mail a courtesy copy, just in case someone was curious. James stood frozen. Hannah stared at the form, like it might rearrange its own words. Upstairs, muffled bass thudded from behind Troy's closed door. Some lazy beat, his usual soundtrack to apathy. Libby stepped out from the hall bath, towel over her shoulder, earbuds in. She caught the silence and slowed her steps. On the way to her room, she paused by the home office. The door was open. The printer still hummed faintly. Curious, she leaned in. The tray held a single printed page. Confirmation of beneficiary update. 529 custodial education account. Below it, a second item lay flat, face down but unmistakable. A diploma frame. Empty, clean, waiting. She didn't touch it, just stood there a moment longer. Then she looked toward the hallway, where Irene had disappeared, and quietly shut the office door behind her. In the kitchen, Hannah stared at the screen. This is some kind of mistake, she muttered. James looked over her shoulder but said nothing. He didn't know what he was looking at, only that whatever they thought was guaranteed had just shifted. In the other room, Irene stood by the fireplace, her tea cooling beside a bowl of dried hydrangeas. She opened a drawer in the console table and pulled out a new file folder. On the label, written in her careful, looping hand, Legacy, Phase 2. She added the latest tax document to the front pocket and closed the drawer again. Behind her, the sound of digital life carried on, notifications, alerts, keyboards clicking too late. She just smiled, very slightly, at the emptiness of the frame upstairs. The text came in just after 6 p.m., landing with the same tone Hannah used for Christmas invitations and staged photo drops. Hannah, Walker fam thread. Hey all, we're looking at May 18th for Troy's early graduation party. Thinking BBQ, maybe a taco truck? Can everyone pitch in for food plus decor? I'll organize it, of course. Let me know who's in. The photo attached was worse than the message. Troy in sunglasses and a mock cap and gown, holding a plastic champagne flute in one hand and a Yale-bound sign in the other. His smirk looked factory-issued. Irene read it twice, then once more, just to be sure. She didn't type anything, just let the silence grow beneath the message, like roots under a house. Her phone buzzed again. James this time, replying with a thumbs-up emoji, and whatever you need, babe. Marcia's reply was quick and neutral. Congrats. Let me know if you need tax guidance around gifts. Rita's bubble hovered for a full minute before her response arrived. Let them throw a party for smoke. I'll bring marshmallows. Irene smiled almost imperceptibly. She tapped the message field, hovered her thumb over the keys, then typed 4 words. Irene, I'll get back to you. Then she put the phone down and opened her laptop. Outside, the lawn was damp from the late watering cycle. Inside, the house was still except for the low hum of the fridge and the click of Irene's keystrokes. She logged into her hotel rewards account and searched for a campus inn near the liberal arts college Libby had quietly circled in her college binder weeks ago. The one no one else bothered to ask about. She found a suite, queen bed, breakfast included, free Wi-Fi, walking distance to admission. May 18th, 20 reserved. Name on file Irene Walker. She printed the confirmation and slid it into the folder marked Travel. Academic. Then she called Marcia. Evening Irene, Marcia answered. Saw the group thread. Festive. Can you confirm something for me? Irene asked, already knowing the answer. Of course. The reassigned fund. Libby's fully sealed, Marcia said. Custodial control is yours. No further edits possible without a new agreement which would require your signature and Libby's consent. No one else can touch it, including James. Including James, Marcia said. They'd need a court order. Good, Irene replied. Do they know yet? Not officially. Well, Marcia said, a smile audible in her voice. You always did appreciate a quiet audit. They hung up. The phone rang again 5 minutes later. This time it was James. Irene let it go to voicemail. He called again, then texted. James, hey. Can we talk real quick? Just you and me. No punctuation. That was how she knew he was nervous. She watched the message sit unread for 30 more seconds, then locked her phone and set it face down beside the teapot. She wasn't in the mood for half-hearted apologies, wrapped in good intention. The printer kicked on behind her. Libby, coming down the stairs with a stack of library books, paused at the office door. What's that? Hotel confirmation, Irene said. Campus visit. Libby blinked. For me? For us. Libby's face tightened, caught somewhere between hope and fear. Are you sure they're going to be okay with that? They don't have to be, Irene said. Outside, the sky was softening into dusk, streaked with lavender and charcoal. Somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, a neighbor's wind chimes jingled faintly. You've already made the reservation? Libby asked. Irene nodded. We leave the day of your brother's party. Libby hesitated. Won't they notice you're not there? I hope so. She turned back to the printer, collecting the warm page and sliding it into her binder. The first sign was the password prompt. Hannah sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, fingers flying across the keys as she muttered. It's not this one, or this, or this. She tried her birthday, Troy's middle name, their old street address. Nothing worked. James stood nearby, sipping reheated coffee like it might suddenly grant him courage. Are you sure you're using the right portal? He asked. It's her portal, Hannah snapped. She gave me access years ago, remember? When we set up the account. But she never gave you full control, James said. I don't need control, I just need to check the balance, so we can appeal the FAFSA decision. They'll make exceptions if we can prove there's money. She tried again. The page blinked. Account locked after multiple failed attempts. Hannah's face went pale. Let me call her, James offered. No, Hannah said, already tapping a new number into her phone. She's not going to answer us. But Marcia will. She pressed the speaker icon and leaned in. Marcia Trent, accounting. Hello, this is Marcia. Yes, hi. This is Irene Walker, Hannah said, her voice tight and nasal. I'm having trouble accessing my 529 portal and need to reset my credentials. There was a pause. Irene, Marcia said slowly. Do you mind confirming the security passphrase before we proceed? Hannah hesitated. Magnolia? It's Magnolia, right? Another pause. Longer. I'm sorry, I can't continue this call, Marcia said firmly. This line is now being recorded. Goodbye? The click was definitive. Are you kidding me? Hannah stared at her phone, mouth hanging open. She hung up. She hung up. She knew, James murmured. She knew it was you. Hannah stood suddenly, pushing her chair back with a loud scrape. I'm going over there. James didn't try to stop her. The knock came hard and fast. Irene was in the garden, kneeling beside her tomatoes, hands in the soil. She didn't look up at first. Irene, Hannah barked from the gate. We need to talk. Now. Irene stood slowly, brushed the dirt from her gloves, and met her daughter-in-law's gaze with the calm of someone who'd been expecting a storm. You changed the password. I did, Irene said. You locked us out. I did. Why? Because I reassigned the fund. The silence that followed hit harder than a scream. Hannah blinked. You what? James had appeared behind her now, phone still in hand. You reassigned it? He asked. Without telling us? I didn't need to tell you, Irene said simply. It was never yours to begin with. But we planned everything around that money, Hannah said, voice cracking. Troy's schools, his prep courses, his future. Then you should have planned around respect, Irene replied. She removed her gloves, setting them on the edge of the planter. To who? James asked quietly. If not him, to who? Irene looked at him, full and steady. To the one who wipes her own hands, it landed like a stone in water. The phrase rippled through the air, undeniable. James looked away first. Hannah's voice dropped low. You picked her? Irene didn't blink. I didn't pick her. She earned it. Hannah laughed once, bitter and sharp. Troy's going to Yale. No, Irene said. Troy was planning on going to Yale. Plans change. I can't believe you, Hannah muttered. This is sabotage. No, Irene corrected, calm and quiet. This is accountability. From the upstairs window, Libby watched the confrontation unfold. Her arms crossed, eyes wide. She hadn't been told. Not in words, but she knew. She stepped back into her room, closed the curtain, and sat on the edge of her bed. A folded college brochure lay beside her. Downstairs, the gate creaked shut. Irene returned to her tomatoes, hands in the earth, fingers steady. Behind her, James stood unmoving, phone still glowing in his palm. The dining room table looked different without her. They had still set it, brisket, green beans, sweet potato casserole, but it felt like a dress rehearsal for a play no one wanted to watch. The air was thick with what wasn't being said. Troy sulked at one end, headphones in. Hannah stabbed at her salad with more effort than precision. James was unusually quiet, his fork pushing food around in endless looping circles. No one mentioned Irene, no one had to. The chair at the far end sat empty, linen napkins still folded, plate untouched. A hollow centerpiece of tulips drooped slightly under the weight of a humid May afternoon. There were no jokes, no group photo attempts, no awkward grace before meals, just the scraping of silverware and the long shadow of an absence none of them wanted to name. At 7:52 p.m., Libby knocked on Irene's door. Irene opened it without surprise. You're late. Libby held up a paper bag, warm grease spots soaking through the bottom. They didn't eat much. Neither did I, Irene said, stepping aside to let her in. The two sat across from each other, in the breakfast nook, the overhead light casting soft yellow arcs across the table. Libby unpacked the bag. Brisket, mac and cheese, cornbread, still warm. I wrapped yours separate, she said. Of course you did, Irene replied. They ate quietly, the way people do when the food isn't the point. Outside, the backyard lights flickered on, illuminating the neat rows of herbs and rose bushes. Rita's wind chimes tinkled faintly across the property line. They didn't really talk, Libby said, just ate and stared. Let them digest the silence, Irene murmured. It has more flavor than the brisket. After a few bites, Irene stood and crossed to her desk. She opened a drawer, pulled something out, then returned to the table and slid it across to Libby. A small linen-bound notebook, navy blue, with a leather strap that looped around a tiny gold button. What's this? Libby asked, brushing her fingers across the cover. For college thoughts, Irene said. Write them down before others try to rewrite them. Libby turned it over, then opened to the first blank page. Inside the front cover was a note, handwritten in black ink. No one gets to narrate your story but you. Libby blinked fast and looked up, as if unsure whether to cry or memorize the moment. Thank you, she said. Irene nodded once. You've earned more than just tuition. From the hallway, Rita's voice floated in before her footsteps did. There's peach cobbler if either of you is smart enough to leave room. She appeared with a pie dish in one hand, ice cream in the other. Rita slid into the third chair and set both down with a practiced clatter. So, how was the dinner I didn't attend? Libby snorted. Weird. Quiet, Irene added. Rita grinned. We always show up, just not where they expect. Irene's phone buzzed across the table. She picked it up, glanced once, then turned the screen to show Rita and Libby. A text from Hannah. I hope you're proud of splitting the family. Irene didn't reply. She opened her settings, scrolled to the contact, and hit block. The name vanished from the screen. Rita reached over with a fork and took a bite of cobbler straight from the dish. Well, if that's the tone they're taking, I'd say your timing was just about perfect. Libby stared at the notebook in her hands. She opened to the first page, wrote the date in the top right corner, and then paused, pen hovering. "Do you think they'll ever forgive you?" she asked, barely louder than a whisper. "I'm not waiting for forgiveness," Irene said. She stood and began clearing the table. Outside, thunder rumbled far off in the distance. Not a storm, just a warning. The envelope came on a Wednesday. It was cream-colored, thick stock, the college crest embossed in deep burgundy across the flap. Irene had checked the mailbox 3 times that morning, each time pretending it was out of habit, not hope. Now it sat unopened on the kitchen table, beside a fresh pot of Earl Grey and a bowl of sliced peaches. Libby stared at it like it might disappear if she looked too hard. "What if it's a wait list? Then we plan again," Irene said. "And if it's a no?" Rita, spooning honey into her tea, didn't look up. "Then we still eat peaches and send in the next one." Libby took a deep breath, slid her finger under the flap, and peeled it open. The letter slid out smooth as silk. She unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the page. Then she stopped. "Froze." "Well?" Rita prompted. Libby swallowed. "It says, 'Congratulations,'" Irene's breath caught. Libby kept reading. "Early admission granted. Merit scholarship awarded. Welcome weekend invite enclosed." Her hands shook, just slightly. Irene reached across the table, took the letter gently, and read it for herself. By the second paragraph, her eyes were glassy. She didn't sob. She didn't speak. Just a single tear ran down her cheek and disappeared into the creases of her smile. Rita slid a tissue across the table without saying anything. "Did you think I wouldn't get in?" Libby asked, voice barely audible. Irene folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it on the table with reverence. "I knew you would. I just didn't know how much it would mean to see it." Libby stared at her, the disbelief still sinking in. "I'm going to college." "You are," Irene said. "On your name, on your merit. No conditions, no shadows." Outside, the mail truck rattled away down the cul-de-sac. Spring leaves twitched in the breeze. The whole world had just shifted, and yet nothing looked different. At the Walker house, a different sound echoed. Digital bass, faint keyboard clicks, the hum of disengagement. Troy was scrolling Instagram when he saw the post. Libby's school account had shared it. "Big news. Shout out to Libby Walker for earning early admission to Briarfield with honors. #future scholar. #class of 2029. There was a photo. Libby standing in front of a mural at the school, holding the acceptance letter in one hand, eyes wide and glowing. Troy stared at it for a second longer than he meant to. Then he tossed his phone on the bed and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Downstairs, Hannah heard the notification ping on her own feed. She opened the app. Her lips thinned. She posted it. She hissed, "Seriously?" James looked up from his tablet. "Posted what?" "The school. Her. All of it." She turned the screen to him. "She made it public." James leaned forward. His eyes moved across the image. The caption, the dozens of likes and "so proud" comments from classmates, teachers, neighbors. All the people who'd never even noticed Libby existed. "She timed this," Hannah said. "She wanted it to sting." James didn't respond. "She's using it to humiliate Troy, and Irene's behind it. I know she is." James set his tablet down. Or maybe Libby just got in. Maybe it's hers. Hannah snapped her head toward him. "You're taking their side? I'm just not sure we have one." Back at Irene's, Libby sat at the kitchen counter, still holding the envelope like it might vanish if she let go. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up and changed her Instagram bio. "Incoming freshman, class of 2029. Then she slid the phone across the table and looked at Irene. "You really think they'll let it go?" "They won't," Irene said. "But that's their work, not yours." Rita raised her cup. "To the one who wiped her own hands." Libby grinned, and for the first time, she believed it wasn't stolen. It was earned. The kitchen smelled like lemon balm and printer ink. Irene sat at the head of the breakfast table, glasses perched low, laptop open in front of her. The screen glowed with Marcia's latest email. 529 account amendment options attached. Expansion includes housing, books, meal plan, and round-trip travel. per new custodian request. She clicked open the PDF, then the form beneath it. One by one, the checkboxes appeared. Tuition, housing, books, travel, meals, equipment. The cursor hovered a moment longer before she checked them all. From the stove, Rita poured hot water into a mug and gave it a swirl. You're giving her everything. She's earned it. And when the tire blows on the bus or the bursar forgets to post a payment. Irene looked up. Then we have a backup. Rita raised her brow. Do we? Irene pulled a separate folder from the drawer. Inside, a draft for a second custodial account, smaller in size, labeled only emergency. LGW. Rita grinned. You think of everything. I've had time. Upstairs, Libby was lacing up black sneakers, hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She checked the mirror, grabbed her backpack, and double-checked the pockets for her apron. It smelled faintly of fryer oil and cinnamon sugar. The part-time job at the bakery hadn't been Irene's idea. Libby had applied quietly, gotten hired on the spot. She'd started her first shift the same day the acceptance letter arrived. When Irene offered to drive her, Libby just smiled. I want to pay for my own spending money. Feels better that way. Now Irene sat reviewing routing numbers and bank forms. She pulled out a small envelope with a debit card inside. Libby Grace Walker, it read. She peeled off the sticker and slid the card into a new wallet. Across the hall, the printer kicked on. She printed the bank authorization form and signed it. At the bottom, one more line had been added. Secondary access, I. Walker. She tucked the wallet into a drawer and texted Libby, bring your ID after work. I've added you to the account. No emoji. Irene didn't believe in them. An hour later, James texted, James, so you're cutting us out completely. Irene stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't type a word, just let the message sit, unread and undeserved. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Thread notification. Walker fam group chat. Hannah has left the conversation. Then, a second later, blocked. You can no longer send messages to this contact. Irene set the phone down. Quietly, Rita didn't look up from the puzzle she was working in the living room. Do I even want to know? They're doing what people do when control slips. Throw tantrums? No, Irene said. Disappear and call it dignity. Outside, the air thickened into late May heat, clouds clustering along the western horizon. Irene opened the front door just in time to see Libby approaching from the sidewalk, apron tucked into her bag, hairline damp with work sweat and sun. She stepped inside and dropped her backpack gently by the door. Hey, Irene handed her the wallet. You have access now. If you need anything tuition, books, groceries, you don't ask them. You use this. Libby opened it slowly. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just keep showing up the way you do. A lump formed in Libby's throat. You think they'll ever? They're not thinking, Irene said, brushing a strand of hair from Libby's forehead. They're reacting. It's not the same thing. They sat together in the quiet for a moment, the hum of the house wrapping around them like a blanket. Outside, thunder rumbled again. This time, closer. It was quiet in the study, except for the rhythmic scratch of pen against paper. Irene sat with her reading glasses, low on her nose, signing the final page of the notarized form. The pen moved steadily, no tremble in her fingers. The room smelled faintly of vanilla envelopes and dust. Old things, final things. Across from her, Rita flipped through the packet one last time, red pen in hand. The IRA's listed with the new beneficiary, she murmured. House deeds in the trust, per the revised terms. Healthcare proxies in Libby's name too. You sure you don't want to leave something, anything, for James? Irene didn't look up. He'll inherit what he already chose, distance. Rita set the pages down and leaned back in the chair, one brow raised. Cold. No, Irene replied. Clear. She rose and crossed to the fireproof safe in the corner. It was small but solid, steel gray with a brass dial that clicked satisfyingly under her fingers. She opened it and placed the folder inside, then shut it and turned the lock. On the front, in her clean looping script, a single word had been printed and taped in place. Lijishi. exhaled softly. From the hallway, her cell buzzed on the charger. She didn't move. Rita stood instead, glanced at the screen, and snorted. Your grandson's found his keyboard again. She handed over the phone. Irene scanned the notification. Troy Walker Instagram story. Some people punish success just because it isn't theirs. The caption sat above a filtered selfie. Troy reclining on a pool chair, designer sunglasses in place, middle finger, half cropped at the edge of the frame. Irene handed the phone back. He still thinks this is about punishment. What would you call it? Rita asked. Irene smiled softly. Redefinition. She walked over to her desk and picked up the phone again. Not to scroll, but to call. Libby answered on the first ring. I just finished everything, Irene said. Libby's voice was cautious. Finished what? The legacy documents. Trust, property, accounts. Everything that matters after I'm gone. There was a pause. You didn't have to. I did, Irene said, gently but firmly. Because no one gets to erase you. Not even blood. On the other end, Libby was quiet. Irene could hear the faint rustle of paper. Maybe her homework, maybe her college planner. Then Libby whispered, okay. After the call ended, Irene stayed seated for a while, her fingers resting lightly on the tabletop. The house still around her. Outside, a single squirrel darted across the lawn, chased by wind that smelled faintly of summer soil and something turning. Meanwhile, in the Walker household across the cul-de-sac, James stood by the upstairs window, staring at his phone. He had just checked the county's public filings on a hunch. His name was no longer listed on the property record. Mom changed the deed, he said aloud. Hannah looked up from her tablet. What? She removed me. The house is going to Libby. Hannah blinked. Can she do that? She already did. From downstairs, Troy yelled. Are we out of oat milk or what? James didn't answer. Back at Irene's, Rita finished scribbling a note on the top page of her own will binder. She snapped it shut and nodded to herself. Clean cuts, she said. Just the way you used to prune roses. Irene chuckled softly, walking to the window, watching the sky. He never defined success properly, she said, almost to herself. Rita tilted her head. And you? I don't think success is what you take, Irene said. It's what you make space for. She pressed her palm against the glass, watching the clouds roll in. The train pulled into Briarfield Station, just after 10:17 a.m., right on time, sleek and humming against the quiet of a college town, too polished to pretend it was anything else. Irene stepped down first, cane in one hand, Libby's overnight duffel in the other. Her slacks were pressed sharp, blouse tucked and crisp, despite the soft early heat. Libby followed close behind, backpack over one shoulder, her fingers fluttering between the zipper and the frayed lanyard looped around her wrist. This way, Irene said, not bothering to check the campus map. She'd already memorized it. The walk to the admissions office wound through tree-lined quads and freshly painted bike lanes. Students flitted past in sundresses and sweatshirts, earbuds in, lattes balanced on handlebars. It looked exactly like the brochures, too clean, too cinematic, too perfect. And yet Libby didn't feel out of place. She felt like maybe she'd just caught up. Their admissions counselor was named Mallory, a third-year senior with red glasses and a cadence like she'd been trained in broadcast journalism. We're so thrilled you're here, Libby, she chirped. And Mrs.? I'm just Irene, she replied, with a polite nod. They toured the Arts Center, the library's vaulted reading room, a rooftop greenhouse with sun-warmed tomatoes, and finally, Hall West, the dorm building where Libby's name was already penciled in, beside room 214. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy, but the window overlooked a quad full of elms, and there was a bulletin board pinned with Welcome Class of 2029 in hand-cut glitter letters. Libby stared at it longer than she meant to. Irene stepped forward, setting a small flat box on the desk in the corner. What's this? Open it. Libby peeled the lid off slowly. Inside sat a new laptop, sleek, silver, still wrapped in plastic. She opened it carefully, then saw the engraving just beneath the trackpad. Earned. Not inherited. Her throat caught. You didn't have to. I did, Irene said. Because no one gave you this. You made it. Libby didn't respond, just nodded quickly, blinking hard. Dinner was off campus, in a small bistro tucked behind a used bookstore. Rita had arrived an hour earlier by car and was already seated, sipping an Arnold Palmer with extra lemon. You two look like you just closed escrow on a whole new life, she said as they slid into the booth. Libby laughed, the kind that cracked under emotion. I walked the quad, she said. I saw my room. It's real. It's yours, Irene added, unfolding her napkin. They ordered pasta, garlic bread, and something called campus cobbler, which tasted exactly like the dining hall had outsourced dessert to someone's grandmother. Over wine, Rita leaned in and said, "It's funny, isn't it? They're probably sitting in that same house, waiting for something to come back to them." "They can keep waiting," Irene said. "Let them live in what they built." "And what did we build?" Libby asked. Irene reached across the table, squeezed her hand gently. "Something that grows." Later that evening, they returned to campus one last time to stroll the quad beneath low, lavender dusk. Lights flickered on in the dorms. A group of students played acoustic guitar under an oak tree, the chords light and aimless. Libby stopped near Hall West and looked up at the second floor, where her room would be. Something shifted behind her eyes. "I never thought I'd stand here," she said softly. "Not like this." "You're not standing here," Irene said. "You're arriving." Rita took a photo then, just one, Libby in the foreground, Irene by her side, dorm lights like constellations blinking into place above them. In the background, the wind rustled soft through the elm leaves. Libby turned her face toward it and let herself cry, for the first time without shame. She didn't wipe the tears. She let them fall. The laundry room was quiet, except for the hiss of steam. Irene stood at the ironing board, sleeves rolled up, her iron gliding in slow, practiced motions across a cream blouse with a faint, rust-colored stain near the hip. The mark had faded to memory now, scrubbed and soaked over the months, but it was still there, soft-edged, stubborn. She didn't mind. She wasn't trying to erase it anymore. She pressed the last seam, smoothed the cuffs, and folded the blouse into a neat square. It went into the linen drawer beneath the dish towels, not to wear, just to keep. Libby stepped into the doorway, mug in hand. "You're still holding on to that shirt," Irene glanced over her shoulder. "Not holding on, just putting it away properly." "You could have tossed it." "I could have," Irene agreed, turning off the iron. "But I rewrote what it meant." She didn't have to say what the stain was from. They both remembered Troy's careless flick of a jelly knife across the counter, the loud shrug, the way he wiped his hands on Irene's blouse like it was a napkin without consequence. That was before transcripts and deadlines and fund clauses, back when entitlement was still invisible enough to pass as youth. Libby leaned against the doorframe, quiet. The coffee in her mug steamed upward, soft curls disappearing into the light. "I never told you this," she said, "but I used to think they were right. That quiet girls didn't get chosen. That if I just stayed good and unspoken, someone would notice." Irene stepped closer and lifted a strand of hair from Libby's cheek, tucking it gently behind her ear. "They did notice," she said. "They just didn't want to share." The dryer buzzed in the background. Neither moved. The voicemail came late that night. It arrived with no warning, just the soft vibration of Irene's phone on the kitchen counter. James voicemail 032. "Mom, it's me. I get it now. About the fund. About Libby. About all of it. Too late. I know. I just wanted to say that. Yeah, that's it." She listened once, then again. She didn't respond, but she didn't delete it either. Instead, she tapped save and filed it in a folder marked family, closed threads. In the morning, the house was wrapped in soft light. Sun poured through the window over the sink, casting gold across the hardwood floor. The air smelled like cinnamon toast and clean linen. Libby sat at the table, hair damp from the shower, scanning a campus packing list she'd printed in the early hours. Irene poured them both coffee, hers black, Libby's with oat milk and too much sugar. "You've got 2 suitcases," Irene said, setting the cup down. You'll need to decide what's necessary and what's not. Libby looked up. How do you usually tell? Irene smiled. Whatever makes you feel like yourself, that stays. They sat in silence, the kind that feels full, not empty, the kind that follows storms and rewrites endings. Outside, a blue jay landed on the back fence. The sprinkler ticked on in slow rotation, mist catching in the morning light like a 1,000-second. Libby set down her mug. Are you ready for today? Irene nodded once. I've been ready for years. I just didn't know it would be you. They finished their coffee without rush. The bags were already packed, the train tickets printed, the laptop zipped into a case, the notebook tucked into a side pocket, half filled now, pages of dreams and doubts and draft beginnings. Before they left, Irene opened the drawer again and glanced once more at the blouse folded inside. Then she shut the drawer and locked it. She didn't need the stain to remind her anymore. As she turned back toward the door, her voice was calm, certain. He wiped his hands on my blouse. I wiped him from the future and gave it to someone who earned it.